Hello and welcome to Furious Driving, and you join me today here in Hippo the Freelander, heading north on the M40 towards Britain's industrial heartland, because we're approaching, as I film this, a very sad anniversary. 20 years since my beloved Rover company went pop, and that was the end of Rover cars being built in this country, indeed anywhere, forever, as far as we know at the moment in 2025. So I am making a pilgrimage today. Actually, for the second attempt, I'm making a pilgrimage today to go and revisit where Rover started, where they came from, and try and put my feet on the site of every major location that was to do with Rover during its incarnation. And this is going to be more than you might think, and not in fact going to the town you might think, because although Rover is synonymous with Solihull and Birmingham, they didn't start there. No, they started in Coventry. So that's where I'm heading at the moment, heading that way towards Coventry in a British built car, which is sort of a Rover, because the Freelander was built on sort of British Leyland offcasts, and it was devised under Rover Company's ownership when Rover and Land Rover were still one unit. So it's kind of significant. And I have a bit of a confession to make. First of all, please do hit like, please do hit subscribe. If you enjoy this video, then please share it on all of your socials with your friends, because that kind of thing makes days like this worthwhile me doing. My confession, this is the second time I've tried to make this pilgrimage, because a couple of weeks ago I was trying to do this. I was trying to be organised and do this like a month before the anniversary, and I thought it would be really appropriate to take the last real proper Rover, the Rover 75, back to where it came from. And well, you probably saw that video where I spent 7 hours trying to drive back from Oxford to Kent in a Rover 75 that wouldn't do more than 10 miles or 10 minutes at a push. Yeah, that was when I was trying to do this last time. So it's sort of symbolic, if you like. A nice analogy for the Rover company that were trying so hard but failing so well, that the Rover 75 didn't do the trip it was destined to do, it commercially or indeed when I tried to take it around the Midlands. But it did make crucially one stop, thankfully, which is the most relevant stop, so we'll hit that point later on in the video. But first of all, I'm heading to, where am I heading to? Queen Victoria Road in the heart of Coventry, and I'm hoping I can actually get there and park the car there, because it looks like I can on Google Earth. So we'll find out. This journey could have been so much longer, as the British car industry was a rambling, incestuous and complicated mess, with companies like Press Steel producing major parts but not actually being part of Rover, although they were later on absorbed by BL or BMHC, which were also part of the Rover company because it was a bigger overall empire. So I've cut this off at 8 facilities that were operated by Rover for making cars or as shadow factories for the war effort. And without stopping, this alone is a 2.25 hour, 70-mile adventure. And I have to say a massive thank you to the lovely people at the British Motor Museum's archives, because they really helped me work out what were the core sites to visit. Now, the thing is that people don't really necessarily appreciate anymore is that Rover had quite an incredible history. They built some amazing cars and they did some astonishing things. Like they built some of the first jet engines and jet-powered cars. This is Rover we're talking about. You know, the people who tied up with Honda and wound up being bought by BMW and then scrapped by, well, pillaged basically by charlatans. An incredible company. So hopefully, following along here today, you'll learn a bit of incredible history about the Rover company. Right, off we go to Coventry. Send me to Coventry. Now we're heading down. The side you can see out that of the car looks very modernish, but the side on the right-hand side of the car is very kind of Victorian, not terraces, Victorian townhouses, row upon row of them, probably dating to around the time of this first factory we're heading to. The Rover was actually started in 1877, so they were almost 150 years ago now, in what was known as the Meteor Works, which is a great name, really, isn't it? Meteor Works. I'd love to work somewhere called that. And it was in the heart of Coventry, where only minute or two away now. Hang on, what are we doing? No, not going up there. Going up here. Yeah, so the middle of Coventry, a real mixture of brand new and very old, and a lot of it was built up in the 50s and 60s, and some of it was brilliant brutalism, some of it's just really ugly. Interesting city. Now I want not that one, I don't think. No, 0.3 of a mile, okay. And for some reason the phone hasn't given me spoken instructions, so I'm having to kind of guess a little bit, which is great. So we're actually heading off to really near the cathedral, which I didn't realise we were going that close to it. Yeah, so really interesting I guess that's 1950s, isn't it? That big building in front of us. That's cool. Into a 20 zone, because of course we are. Where are we going? Queen Victoria Road on the right. Okay, can we drive down here still? Not pedestrianised, is it? New road layout ahead. This is it. This is New Victoria Road. I don't know exactly where on this road the Meteor Works was, but we'll drive down and have a quick look. Okay, so we can't stop anywhere down here. This is interesting. 30-mile-an-hour limit, and we can't stop. Brilliant. We can't do a right turn. Perfect. So we've driven down where we started from. So rather unhelpfully, Queen Victoria Road is firstly under roadworks, so you can't really see much of it at all. It's secondly a red route, so I can't stop anywhere. And thirdly, it's been completely redeveloped, so there's really nothing to show any of the heritage of what was the Meteor Works, which was where the Rover company started. And that's a shame. I don't know if I can pull into anywhere down here to stop and just get out the car and be here. I suspect I probably can't. So yeah, somewhere along here, somewhere along this road, roadworks here. So 1877, this is where, along here somewhere, well, they're putting trams in. That's interesting, going back to their roots, if you like. This is where John Kemp Starley and William Sutton started their company building penny farthings and tricycles in 1877. Somewhere along here, but I'd say every single building on here, I reckon, is less than 30 years old. So there's no history at all, no sign of a blue plaque, no nothing. Now, Starley's uncle, James Starley, was considered the father of the cycle industry here in Britain, and he had cycle works here in Coventry as well, so it's kind of a family affair. And it was here that they first used the Rover name, and they stuck it on a tricycle in 1884. But then the event which really put the Rover name on the map was the Rover safety cycle, the Rover safety bicycle. This was the invention of the proper modern bicycle, which had two equally sized wheels with the pedals in the middle and the chain drive and the handlebars that were sensible. This was the first modern bicycle that made sense as a bike to everyday normal people. And that was really what put the company on the map and made them really stand out. Now, there's basically nowhere I can stop down here to get out and have a wander around. There's a new car park. There's an old church. There's a new look. Am I going the right way? I think I'm probably not. Uh-oh, this is getting worse. That's a really interesting 50s building up there. What's that? The cooperative. That's a beautiful 50s thing. Yeah, I want to come back here and do some architecture photography because this is lovely. Oh, the Telegraph Hotel. I guess that used to be a newspaper building, perhaps. Right, if I jump back on the ring road and head towards Birmingham, that's going to sort of go in the right direction, but we are really needing to stay in the city centre because we're not going too far away to our next stop, because Coventry was really Rover's home for quite a long time. Right, so my next stop is also going to be in Coventry. It's going to be a road called Helen Street, which we're going to head to in a moment. I'll quickly tell you, William Sutton doubted the Rover safety cycle, even though Henry Sturmley of the Cyclist magazine, I wonder if this is Sturmley of Sturmley Archer, the cycle gear people of later years, the Rover had set the fashion of the world. Anyway, so he left the business and the company was renamed to J.K. Starley & Co. And it took off. It did really well. But he didn't stick with it that long. He decided to cash in on his investment, sold it for £150,000, which is serious money in the Victorian era. And in 1895, under new ownership, it became the Rover Cycle Company. But it was the new world. Engines and petrol power had been invented and was very exciting. And Rover, being an innovative and thrusting company of youth and vigour, wanted some of that. So in 1902, they built their first motorised bicycle, or as we like to call them, motorbike. And this thing was called the Imperial Rover motorcycle, and it was a 2.5 horsepower machine which sold for £55. As I say, 1902, this was new and exciting. I'm doing a left just here. In fact, they became really well known for their motorbikes, and they brought out a second one, a 3.5 horsepower. What year was that? In 1911. Also very, very popular. But in the interim, two fairly big things happened. First of all, in 1906, they changed their name to the Rover Company, which is what we know and love now. And secondly, in 1904, they brought out their first car. Am I going down here? Yes, I think I am. Towards West Orchard and medieval Spon Street. I'm just driving in circles here, honestly. So this is the oldest known surviving Rover. We spoke about the factory being just around the corner in Coventry. This is literally the oldest living, surviving Rover. It's a 1904 8 horsepower or 8 HP. Really, really simple bodywork and design compared to later cars. Got the flat, squared off bonnet, the radiator elements exposed to the front, the crank handle visible there. Big, big brass lamps. It is a 3-pedal design, but I don't think it's clutch, brake, accelerator on this one. You do of course have the hand controls for the throttle and the mixture, which you can see work down there. Beautiful condition little thing. Surprisingly small. A lot of the oily cars are very, very big, but this one's actually not that huge. But yeah, since we were in the area, it's been a shame not to see the very, very first car they actually made. At least the Freelander is a very comfortable companion for this kind of nonsense. I think I want to go over there, not crash and die ideally. So this is now more massive redevelopment. I mean, city centres don't stand still for long, but this is just so different to how it would have been in, well, 100 years ago. We're going here straight on, yeah. Where are we? Where are we? Where are we? Can't believe a factory was down here. This is all just houses. I reckon these are late 1800s, these houses as well, looking at the design. And maybe they're all workers' houses who worked at the Rover. Gosh, Stamford Riven slabs, £2.35. Snacks are cheap around here, but they don't look very tasty. So the old place down Queen Victoria Road was called either West Orchard or Meteor Works. This one was called New Meteor Works, which makes sense. I guess it must have been straight ahead of us here, or around this area somewhere. So here we are, somewhere around here is where the New Meteor Works was. There's a big industrial area over there, and it actually says main entrance to the factories in Cromwell, Waterman Road. So somewhere around here, we are standing roughly where the New Meteor Works would have been. Now, when car production started in 1904, the old Meteor Works wasn't big enough, so they moved all the major production to this site over here, about 10 minutes away across Coventry city centre. And by 1912, Rover actually had the biggest range of vehicles. They had everything from small motorbikes up to luxury cars, everything in between. So they were a major, major player, one of the biggest car companies on the planet at this point. Now by 1930, they no longer needed the old Meteor Works and they vacated that, and Helen Street became the main focus of the car company's production. They bought it in 1919 and say 1930, they moved out completely from the old Meteor Works. However, this was not to be a long-lasting site, because the reason we can't find the old New Meteor Works is because it doesn't exist anymore, because in 1940, during the air raids which destroyed the cathedral and everything else, the Rover factory as well was obliterated, and so they had luckily got other shadow factories at work at that point, and so they were able to move out of there and carry on production after the war in the new shadow factories, which is why in Birmingham became the centre of Rover production, and why we now associate Rover with Birmingham and not Coventry, because, well, 1940, that was it. There was nothing left here in Coventry. There's not much here to see either, so let's get back in the car and hit the road again. Right, onwards. Now, although this is sort of fairly dense working class as it would have been housing, it kind of hasn't changed that much, I guess, in some respects. These are pretty old houses. All Bricklayers Arms, there's an old pub on the corner there. Where are we going here? Left turn. I wonder what that was. I wonder if that was connected with Rover back in the 30s, because that's a big old warehouse of exactly the kind of place that would have been very much involved with the motor production. Oh, it's huge. It's exactly the right kind of building. This is some amazing brickwork. I mean, it serves no purpose other than to just be pretty for motorists to be vaguely distracted and amused by, but a lot of effort to make something so mundane really quite nice. Well done, Coventry. I think we're just leaving the Canal District, by the way, which is somewhere I'd really like to go and visit. Now, behind me on my right, and I think possibly that building over there as well, according to the big sign on the side of it, is a Stellantis Performance Academy, so there is still major motor industry stuff happening in this area of the world. Stellantis being obviously one of the biggest, not necessarily most successful, but one of the biggest motor companies on the planet. Speaking of which, there's a lovely Alfa Giulia going by the way. Well, I made a minor pit stop into McDonald's to grab some fries for the road. I already had my cup of coffee to take away. I'm a massive cheapskate, so I'll always take a flask of hot water, little sachets of coffee that I've stolen from hotels or bought from Starbucks earlier, and make my own coffee as much as possible. Although, having said that, if I'm on the road, McDonald's coffee is the one to go for. It's like a third of the price of Starbucks and much nicer. Now let's get back on the road again. Now we're jumping off the dual carriageway now, because this entire area is crisscrossed with loads of dual carriageways and motorways these days. It does make getting around very quick, but not very scenic. But we are now heading to, well, what is an unlikely birthplace of modern aviation. And it looks like it's miles away. You read Wikipedia entries and things, you think, God, this is going to be way out of town. It's going to be well into the countryside. It's not. It's 10 minutes from the heart of Coventry. We're heading to the Chesford Grange Hotel in Kenilworth. So here we are, pulling into what is an unlikely birthplace of the modern aviation age. It looks like it's been massively extended over the last few years, because it's not looking like an old 1920s. Ah, here we go. Here's the main part of it. This is Chesford Grange Hotel, and let me tell you why this place is significant to the history of aviation. Oh, it's really, really windy up here, and the flags are fluttering like crazy. But, as you probably know, Frank Whittle invented the jet engine. The jet engine is a British invention, something to be very proud of in this country. But as it was a wartime invention, the government assigned him a big manufacturer to work with to develop it, and that manufacturer was Rover. They were building aero engines and tank engines and all kinds of munitions and things. So by October 1941, the Whittle 1B jet engine was producing 1,000 pounds of thrust. By December, they developed it to the point of making 14,000 pounds of thrust, which is a lot of oomph compared to a Spitfire or Hurricane's Merlin engine, which is a great piston engine, but the jet engine was something else. Now, the jet engine design team with Frank Whittle and co had originally been based out at Clitheroe in Lancashire, but they got moved out here closer to the rest of the Rover operations in Coventry and Birmingham. It would have been a beautiful, idyllic country setting in 1940. Would have been lovely, wouldn't it? But this is a very, very grand old, I guess, Victorian or slightly older country house. A big conference centre and hotel. Mostly conference centre, I imagine, because we're quite a way outside the city centre. It does look like, when you read the stories online about the history of the Rover and the jet engine, they were sent out into the middle of nowhere. It's literally 10 minutes from the heart of Coventry on the motorway. So about half an hour maybe if you're driving in Austin 7 in 1938. So by 1942, the Whittle Rover engine had been developed really significantly. And a deal was done, though, with Rolls-Royce to hand the project over to Rolls. And that's why we now have Rolls-Royce jet engines powering like half of the world's jet airliner fleet. But those first engines, which were the Rover engines, which were then rebadged as the Rolls-Royces, they were what went on to become the first engines in the British jet fighter planes of the Second World War and the post-war years. Those were the Derwents, weren't they? But it wasn't a one-sided deal, because Rover in return got the production and ongoing spares business for the Meteor tank engine, which actually ran on until well into the 1960s as a really good sort of long-term thing. However, I do think Rolls-Royce did get the better end of the bargain in that particular deal, because Rolls-Royce jet engines, come on, everyone knows them. Still going strong, one of the biggest companies in the world. Right, moving on. Interestingly, actually slightly sadly, I did run into the hotel and just say, is there any history of this place known, and is it known among the staff and things? And the guy said, well, we were something, was a hospital or something, he wasn't really sure what it had been, and there's no plaque up in the wall, which I think is a real shame. That should be really celebrated. If I ran a hotel and Frank Whittle, the father of the jet engine, had developed the jet engine in my hotel, I would want pictures of planes, I'd want a blue plaque on the wall. I would want so much celebrating that. It'd be the biggest thing in the world. I'd rename it the Chesford Grange Derwent Olympus Jet Hotel or something. I'm not going to forget about it. But that's why I'm doing this today. I'm trying to save some of the history that is being forgotten. It's 20 years since Rover went away, but they did so much. It was a car company that developed the jet engine. Next time you're going on holiday and you're charging up the runway at 180 miles an hour in an extruded aluminium tube, waiting to hurtle to 10,000 feet in the air, or higher than that, 30,000 feet, remember the Chesford Grange Hotel, just in Kenilworth, just outside Coventry. You would not be going to Alicante for 15 quid if it wasn't for Frank Whittle. Oh, nice MGB GT. It seems relations between Frank Whittle's Power Jets company and Rover had been fraught, so everyone was happy with the exchange. Rolls-Royce got the research and several complete Wayland and Derwent engines, plus the Rover Jet factory at Barnoldswick. And Rolls-Royce got the Meteor tank engine factory at Nottingham. The deal was done between Rover's Spencer Wilk and Rolls' Ernest Hives over dinner and sealed on a handshake. And that is an amazing building. I've seen that place before. HPL, I don't know what they do, but I adore that building. Perfect Art Deco. Now, our next stop, we're heading to Acox Green. And do you know what? I'm pretty certain I photographed a really nice Roots car for a classic car magazine somewhere just off this road a year or two ago. I'm going to go back and do a video on it. It was such a nice little thing. Talking of places I've done photo shoots, the Phantom Coach. I've done 2 photo shoots in that pub car park over the years. Like 150 miles from home, and I've used that same location twice. Do a nice cup of coffee though, I've got to say. If you're working in the car park, a lovely cup of coffee. Now this is actually about my longest jaunt in terms of miles between stops. About 25 miles, because we're heading from Coventry to Birmingham. But this is still in the realms of the side quest at this point, because this isn't another Rover car factory. Like the hotel wasn't a car factory, but it was a really significant part of, well, British aviation and world aviation history, developing the jet engine and the war effort and all that kind of thing. This is another place we're going to now. We're heading to Acox Green, a place called Clay Lane, which is, again, a shadow factory that was built up so that Rover could do war effort work. And this is where they built Merlin engines and Merlin engine components. But it does mean we've got about a quarter of an hour of just rather unexciting conurbation dual carriageway. I watch a lot of David Freiberger's new YouTube channel now he's left Roadkill and Motor Trend TV. And I really love his sort of exploring the desert videos. That's where he's just going off into the wilderness and sort of finding all these incredible sights. And in part, that's slightly what I'm trying to do here. It's something we've done on magazines with still photos for a long time. We used to do a feature on Classics Monthly called Classic Drive, which is exactly that format, but with, you know, words and still photos, where I say we, a writer and myself, hi Mike, hi Greg, we'll get into a classic car and disappear around a county for the day and just try and stop at as many locations as we could and get a picture of ourselves and the car in those locations. And that's very much the format that Freiberg and me are doing. The difference is, in California, you've got these amazing wide open spaces, long empty roads, and because there's so much land, when an old visitor attraction stops being profitable and closes down and kind of falls into disrepair, instead of being massively valuable real estate that gets rebuilt and redeveloped in a matter of days, it just sits there in the desert. And because the desert is such a forgiving climate, 50 years later you can still see it with peeling paint and not rotted wood. It's a different kind of world. I'm not saying we're hard done by, because we've got so much history packed into such a tiny place here in Britain. But I do kind of get a little bit jealous of the roads and the way stuff is preserved by accident over there. Generally, we're pretty good at preserving history in the UK. But yeah, it'd be nice if it was lovely weather and I could rock up and still see these old places just rotting in the desert. But that doesn't really happen so much in Birmingham. Yeah, anything that's left rotting for more than a day or two gets a new built housing estate on it, with houses not big enough for a family of rabbits to live in. No parking and a postage stamp garden. Not that I'm bitter, or that I've been thinking about it far too much lately, as there's a developer trying to build 2,000 houses around the edge of the 800 house village that I live in. The borough of Solihull, or Solihull, if you're from around here, which will become significant in a few minutes' time. In fact, yes, and I'll stop after the next one, so that's quite interesting. In terms of the drive so far, I shouldn't jinx it, but the Freelander has been brilliant. Initially, I wanted to come in the Rover 75. That didn't really work out. My second choice had been the 200 VI, but I've used the 200 VI for a few things recently. I did it for my drive around the old World War II fighter stations in Kent back in about 3 weeks ago. Thought I'd been using it more than the others too much. I tacked something else. Got the Tomcat out. The Tomcat was my next choice, the Rover 220 Coupe. However, the bindy sticky brakes did mean that was not really an option. That meant the choice of wheels for this particular ride came down to Hippo the Freelander again. Hippo has very much become our lifeboat car of late. It's a really practical size. It's a car you can park anywhere. It's pretty comfortable. It's a nice seating position in it. And it's actually reasonably economical. Well, I say reasonably economical. I've used £50 of diesel so far and I've done 200 miles. In fact, it's terrible on fuel. Forget I was talking about that bit. Scratch that from the video. I thought it did better than that, to be perfectly honest. Oh, there's a purple Toby Carvery down there. Bizarre. Well, I'm not going to say it's the most reliable car in the world. It's an ageing Land Rover. It makes a fuss about things, but it gets you there, is generally the way it goes. I mean, I shouldn't say that at this point. I've still got several major stops to do. And the thing about this car, though, is that it is badged a Land Rover. It was developed by the Rover company. By the time this one was built, this is using the TD4 2-litre BMW diesel engine, and you're finding a 1,000,000,000 BMW 3 Series. Oh, the Arden Hotel, I've stayed there. It's quite a good hotel as it goes. But what's interesting is that in the 3 Series and the 5 Series, it's quite a quiet and refined kind of engine, for a diesel anyway. In this thing, it sounds like a Defender, and I don't know how they've done that with a BMW TD4, but it sounds like a Defender somehow. It's ridiculous, but brilliant. I love that Land Roveriness of it. I'm saying this is a good thing, not a complaint. I wouldn't want a Land Rover to be too quiet and refined. I want a Land Rover to be a little bit straw on the floor and a bit rough around the edges. That's what a Land Rover should be. I thought I was looking at average speed check, which was a bit of a surprise because I hadn't seen any signs. Turns out it's lighting for the airport, which is over there. There's another big Art Deco-y thing based around the airport just there. looks so cool. I think I've stayed in that Holiday Inn as well. But that is such an impressive looking bit of Art Deco that's been, for once, well incorporated into a modern building. Unfortunately, because I'm driving around a dual carriageway, I can't stop and swivel the cameras around very much, which is a shame. We're now heading into very, very nice I guess, late 30s, early 40s suburbia here. Can you imagine in the heart of this, and they've got a Merlin engine factory going on. So yeah, this is very much a trek through suburbia today. Right, okay, so it would appear we have reached our destination. The question is, of course, where would the factory have been? Clay Lane Fish Bar? Oh, this is Clay Lane itself, okay. Let's do a right. It's all houses to the left. The Journey's End pub to our right. What looks like it might have been industrial 70 years ago or 80 years ago. Probably not the massive graveyard. So this is another spot where there's no sign of anything to do with what was here, well, during the Second World War 80 odd years ago. Somewhere, maybe under the Clay Lane Fish Bar, probably not, probably underneath those new build houses, was a factory that's part of the Rover company that was building Merlin engines and then later Meteor engines for years and years and years, but there's literally nothing to see of it here anymore. It's a little bit of disappointment having driven all this way and there's only some new builds to look at. Kind of a shame, really. Also disappointing because I can't eat gluten, I can't even have fish and chips as a celebration to get here. Anyway, well, as this is another massive anticlimax, but at least it's not as vaguely threatening as the old Meteor works, let's head down to our next stop, which is kind of relevant for this car. Now the thing is, here at Acox Green, we are only about 3 miles from our next destination, which is another of the major shadow factories. And this is how Rover kind of expanded in the run-up to the Second World War. The government, I've gone the wrong way. In the late 1930s, as it was obvious the Second World War was going to be a thing, the British government was trying to ramp up production and readiness, increase the size of the army, increase the size of the air force, all this kind of thing, and the navy. And so the big car factories were being developed to have what they call shadow factories, as in extra production facilities which were standing ready either to start producing stuff for the war effort immediately or to be there as a backup in case the primary locations were damaged by enemy bombing. And Rover, they stepped up and they took on several shadow factories, which was very lucky because, as we've already seen, their original factory in Coventry was obliterated in 1940. So they still had a couple of other places, which is what really survived as the Rover company post Second World War. And this first major survivor is where this came from, because it's Solihull. This is where, after Rover created the Land Rover company as a spin-off from the car company, here comes that Freelander again. That's a cool Freelander. But the Solihull factory remains one of the 2 big success stories because it's still going strong, it's still building what it was intended to build, well, post-war, and is one of the most internationally recognised brands on the planet, still bearing the Rover name, even though it's now a different company. So we're now half a mile from the entrance to Land Rover, which is that big building over there to our left. And I go down here, see if we can actually get in, or how close we can get without any kind of actual permission. Probably not very close at all. So this is as close as I'm getting to Lode Lane, the big fence just there. This is where all the Land Rovers were born, the Range Rovers, the Defenders, the Series Land Rovers, all of that stuff. But that goes back to the Second World War, where this was the Shadow factory building Hercules engines for loads of different British bombers and other aircraft. So that, beyond there, is the old factory making the Land Rovers. After the war, because Helen Street had been destroyed, this became the centre of Rover production. All the entire Rover company was based here, and then Rover itself moved out, leaving Land Rover on this site. Of course, when Land Rover was separated from the main company, this went its own separate way. Currently, obviously belongs to Tata. And you have to wonder how many of these suburbs, because we're in a really sort of dense suburban area, exist purely to service that massive factory. It must be an awful lot of them are here specifically because of the Land Rover Solihull factory. And so many of the vehicles on drives around here are actually Land Rovers. It's really interesting. Range Rovers, Evokes, Defenders, mostly Discoveries actually. The Solihull Shadow factory was built across two farms that were bought in 1936 for the purpose and started fitting out in 1939, opening as a factory in 1940. The oldest part of the site is the South Works. After the war, Rover took their option to retain the site as they no longer had an existing real factory anymore. And again, it was named Meteor Works, with cars starting to roll out the door in 1946, although the first fully new model wasn't until the P4 in 1949, not counting, of course, the Land Rover in 48. Like so many other factory sites, the mergers to the 1960s saw it become part of Leyland Motors, British Motor Holdings, British Leyland Motor Corporation, and ultimately Land Rover itself. As well as all of the Land Rovers, the Rover P4, 5, 6 and SD1 all rolled out of here with a Made in Solihull badge under the bonnet. Now we've got the other Shadow factory, which is, well, a little bit further away, and we did it in a different car, so jump aboard to see where the Rover 75 did make it to. So now we've strayed out of the Midlands conurbation. We're down near Oxford at Cowley, of all places. Because this is Mini Plant Oxford, a BMW plant, a mini plant. Why am I here? Well, this is a significant part of the Rover story. So let's get parked up and I'll talk you all about it. Now, I've actually been here many times, believe it or not, because doing my job as a photographer, I've done a lot of photos for Mini themselves, and also for Mini, which one? One of the Mini magazines back when it was still a thing, is actually how I wound up buying my my 2001 Mini. Because we came up here, the first time I came here, to do a photo shoot about the fact it was 15 years of the new Mini. And yeah, off the back of that I started doing photos for Mini themselves, which is quite cool. So I've been here a number of times. And when the Mini turned 20, we did a big thing. We came back here with the Mini group and we did photos here, did a big sort of 20 out of Minis and did a drone shot of them. Yeah, it's a really interesting place, loads of history as far as Mini goes. But yeah, this is quite exciting. There's a really good visitor centre over there with like the story of the Mini, old and new, and you can actually book a tour of the factory itself. And having been around there a couple of times, it's really, really interesting, definitely worth doing. So here we are in Mini Plant Oxford. This is where they still build Minis, as they have done for decades. This was one of the factories. This is where they built the Rover 600, the 800. Going back before that, there's been a Morris plant as well. And this is, of course, where they started building the Rover 75s back in 1998, 99. And you know, the holy grail of Rover 75 botherers are the Cowley-built cars, which have got the black sill. Mine's a 2002, so it was built over at Longbridge. There are new buildings and there are old buildings here. The old buildings along the entrance here, these are where you now have the Mini visitor centre, so you can go and see how the Minis are built, and you can also tour the factory as well. But BMW modernised it fantastically, and when Phoenix sold Rover for £1, they wanted to keep the Mini as one of the two jewels in the crown. Land Rover and Mini were the jewels in the Rover Group crown, and they kept the Mini, which is now obviously thriving. But for Rover, this is where the story ends. This is one of the two big endpoints in the Rover story, because BMW, as I say, retained this as a mini factory. Rover production was moved out of here. The 75 production line was shifted over to Longbridge, lock, stock and barrel, basically shunted up the road to Birmingham. And this had a whole new life, making minis. So we've now had, I think, 4 cars that have been built in this factory at my house. Through those gates, it's an absolute huge empire of construction. The actual stamping of metal doesn't happen here. That happens down in Swindon, which is the old pressed steel plant, which isn't Rover themselves. That's Rover adjacent, which is why we're not going to Swindon today, thank goodness. But I have been there as well. They stamp all the panels for the minis here. The mini panels are then shipped up here. They are assembled, they are painted. There's also a BMW engine plant over in the edge of Wales where they make engines for most of the petrols, all of the diesels, and I think they're now moving into electric. A huge proportion of BMW engines are built not that far away from here as well. So yeah, this is just vast.
Give me the title of the 1991 smash by Salt and Pepper, which begins with the line, Spinderella cut it up on time. No! It was Let's Talk About Sex. Yeah, for a point. Wow, this is good. This is really tense. Which group had their first chart entry in 1985 with You Are My World, and their last in 1988 with There's More to Love, in brackets, than Boy Meets Girl? Let's find it out. It's the Communards. Here we go, my friend. In what year did Annie, I'm Not Your Daddy, give Kid Creole and the Coconuts a top 3 smash?
So now we're heading out into the hills of Kidderminster, the wilds, I guess you might call it, into the countryside. And this is one you might struggle to find a wee bit. This is the last of the shadow factories that didn't go beyond the war, or not much further anyway. Because now we're hunting for the Drakelow tunnels. This is a really interesting thing. They knew that any above ground factory would be an easy target for the bombers. And so they built an underground factory. They tunnelled. It was about a half-mile square and designed in a grid section. So a grid of tunnels. So if there was a bomb that penetrated the roof, it wouldn't be one great cavern that everyone was killed and all the work was disrupted. It would just be a small portion of that grid would be taken out. It's quite a cleverly designed thing. You have to think quite cold and calculating in those kind of aspects, but that's what they did because they had to. But it was another place that was building a lot of engines and engine components for tanks and aircraft. Right, we are getting into the depths of the countryside now. It's been a very urban exploration kind of a day so far. Normally when we do these kind of things, there's a lot of countryside in between places and finding old places that are miles from anywhere. This one, though, has been all city. But now finally we're in a bit of ruralness. We are about, well, just under half an hour's drive with today's traffic and cars out of, well, away from Longbridge. Only a matter of moments in a bomber, although you've got to find this place. And it is an absolute warren of back lanes around here. But again, the Freelander is absolutely perfect for this. Surprisingly nimble car for a little SUV, which is really very much of a strong off-roader. Now, the address I've got is a postcode that's going to put us in the vicinity of it, and then we'll see if we can find it. We are literally meters away now, so keep your eyes open. It's like everything else now, it all seems quite built up and there's a lot of houses showing on the map. There's a caravan park showing on the map now. Okay. It says arrived, but I think we might be kind of here. Am I going the right way here? No, I'm not. I'm going the wrong way. My brakes have really got squeaky this afternoon. Apparently it's here. Ah, is this it? Yes, this is it. I found it. So here we are. This is the last of our shadow factories, which is no longer a shadow factory, no longer involved in making cars and hasn't been for a very long time. This is the entrance to the Drakelow tunnels, now a museum. Oh, I've seen photos of inside this place and it looks incredible. It's definitely the kind of place that you're not going to jump in and out of on a longer tour. You're going to jump into this and then spend all day here exploring and seeing so much. But yeah, this is where, during the Second World War, as I say, it's about half mile square of tunnels under these hills, going a grid kind of a pattern, like a New York City block, where they were making engines for aircraft, for tanks, all kinds of things. And if it wasn't for the big gates here, you would drive straight past it and not even see that entrance down into the hills. Right, so we are off on our next adventure now. So it really is incredible to think that here we are in the absolute middle of nowhere, like the middle of a forest. And going back to those war years, there must have been hundreds, if not thousands, of people working under the hill in there. Construction must have been a major effort, so difficult to do. I mean, obviously they had machinery in those days, but not as advanced as we had. And I imagine a lot of that was done with picks and shovels and buckets. Where would they have even put all of those people? Would they have had to commute out of Birmingham every day? I don't know. Did they have billets somewhere? Were they sleeping underground? Were they on shift for a week or so or something? Where would they have even put all of those people? Would they have had to commute out of Birmingham every day? I don't know. Did they have billets somewhere? Were they sleeping underground? Were they on shift for a week or so or something? It's very easy to glamorise the war years as being something very dramatically romantic and all that kind of stuff. It's very easy to glamorise the war years as something, well, dramatic and romantic, but it must have been really hard. Obviously it was really hard. We must never forget that. It's not all exciting explosions and action movies and Hollywood romance. There's more to it than that. There's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of being miserable in a hole. Like being over there, for example. I cannot imagine that was fun working a 10-hour shift underground while bombers were flying overhead. You're hoping nothing comes through the ceiling. After the war, the tunnels became part of the Cold War regional seat of government network of hidden bunkers and remained active until the early 1990s. I really want to come back and do a proper visit and explore of this place. So now we find ourselves in leafy suburban Birmingham, Longbridge to be exact, where we're going to finish our journey. Because this is a site that was really synonymous with Rover ever since really the 1960s, I guess. Since Land Rover split off, Rover centred its operations here at Longbridge, which is, of course, the end of the story as well, because this is the last site that MG Rover, as it finally became, was working out of when, well, they finally pulled the plug in 2005 on April the 8th. And everyone walked out of that building for the very last time. And we're still a mile from the factory, very densely populated with some relatively old houses. I reckon these are probably 1960s, these houses. Maybe a few of them a bit earlier as well. And again, I wonder how many of these houses exist purely because of the number of people who were working for Rover itself and also for all of the supplying industries as well, the component makers and transportation people. Of course, if you ever come to the Pride of Longbridge show, you'll probably recognise these roads because it does take place on the park, which is just around the corner from here. And these very, very new houses, which we're now seeing, more of them straight ahead of the car. This is kind of what's become of the Rover factory. This is so sad to see. There's the train lines that would have taken new cars away. And what was once factory land is now endless, soulless, identikit shoebox house. If you live in one, I'm sorry I'm being rude. It's very lovely, really. It's not. It's a terrible, thrown together. There's Pride of Longbridge to our left, where we'll be in a couple of weeks' time. And in a moment, we'll find ourselves at Quaygate. The infamous, legendary Quaygate. This is the end of the pilgrimage to the MG Rover fans. Oh, Plymouth still there, good. I'm driving in the wrong way. Let's see what's left of this place. Park on the plinth and get a photo for one thing, then have a quick look around. Right, it's a brand new MG rolling out there, so there's not a lot of the factory left, but we can take a quick look around and finish our story just here. So fittingly, we end our journey here at Longbridge, the iconic Quaygate. And I'm wondering how many more of my cars I'm going to be able to get to park on this plinth out the front and grab a photo before it's gone. Because this is what is now synonymous with what Rover was. It's now part of the Nanjing MG Rover Corporation. As you walk over to the gates, you can still see the beautiful conference centre building, which kind of gives you an idea of how old this site is. Because this is obviously one of the shadow factories from the late 30s, early 40s. And so these buildings went in there. The amazingly pretty brick main offices of Rover were just over there until recently, and you can still see the demolition work. There was actually a Rover Sports Register event to go and visit them before they got taken down. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it to that. I really do want to. But yeah, this is very little left of the old factory at all. You had the Cab 1 and Cab 2 buildings. It was just acres and acres of land. This is going through all the Rover Company years, going back to the 50s, the 60s. So there's a Mondeo over there with an alarm that keeps going off. Into the Austin Rover Group, the Rover Group, the BAE years, the BMW years, and finally the MG Rover Phoenix 4 years. All happened here, and this is where Rover finally came to an end. Obviously, the Freelander is the wrong car to have here. It would have been so good to have the 75 here. But 20 years ago, this spot, the 8th of April 2005, this is where the Rover story came to an end. And it's such a sad tale because this was one of the, at one point, the biggest car company in the world, one of the most advanced car companies in the world, and some of them making the fastest, the most luxurious, the most interesting cars going on the planet, and brought down to this. And the whole reasons for why it failed will fill another video that's hours long, because it's just a litany of success followed by failure, and then further failure, and then bad decisions by people in the wrong places. Sad times, really, sad times. But I'm just really hoping that that one remaining building, the conference centre, is one thing that's actually saved, because that is a beautiful building. Gosh, I remember, it wasn't that long ago, only 2 or 3 years back, I managed to do a photo shoot on an original police Maestro. If you can see that green thing sticking out and then the green building behind it, there's an old brick building further down there, and we shot it outside that. And I think that building's gone now. And all the time I'm standing here, I can hear the demolition people working away. It really is sad. When the Chinese MG Rover originally came back with the MG5 and the rebuilding MGFs, they were doing final assembly here for a little while. But that, I don't think, even happens anymore. There's design work, and maybe even that's gone as well. There's a lot of MG cars here, but really not a lot else. But you can just see how big this site was. I'll get you higher up. It was an enormous, enormous site. And it's just terribly, terribly sad to see it in this way now. Also quite sad to hear Mondeo alarm going off pretty much non-stop. Then you see stuff like that gate with all the interesting ornate decoration. That's probably from the 40s or 50s. This is a properly historic industrial site, and it's just tragically sad that it's not going to be here for very much longer. It's just going to be another 1,000 houses. There has been car production at Longbridge since 1906, when Herbert Austin started his own car company in old workshops that were already on the site. It grew rapidly during the First World War and again during World War II, and underground shadow factory tunnels were dug out in the 1940s. And you've probably seen the rescued, battered up mini shell that was pulled out of there after Rover closed. Post-war it became part of British Motor Corporation, then British Leyland, and eventually the company morphed into Austin Rover, and finally MG Rover, so it was ultimately the last piece of the Rover empire. And here, to go with our trip to the Longbridge and Cowley factories, this is the last 75 off the line. Rather lovely colour as well. This really does mark a significant bookend from the very, very first in 1904 to this 101 years later. The very, very last one. And of course we drove here in a 75 today. It broke down, but we drove here in a 75. The interior remains absolutely beautiful. So I'm really, really lucky. I'm actually getting to drive into the old factory. This is amazing. So you can go and park up outside the conference centre, get a photo outside there. It's devastating to see so little. The nice security man basically said he couldn't hear me on the thing, so I couldn't come in. So this is as far as we get to go in, which is a shame, because this is an amazing site. Just wanted to hit anything on the way out. But yeah, look at that building. Just devastated. I've been in that building, and it was pretty much a ghost town at the time, but wow, such a shame. The tumbleweeds are quite atmospheric. That lovely old 50s gatehouse is a thing of beauty in its own simple industrial way. Driving out of the MG Rover factory probably for the last time. That is kind of sad. Well, that is a sad, kind of a poignant end to our visit here to all the Rover sites, the places that Rover existed at over that 148 years or whatever it was. It was a long-running company. It did so much. It was the first proper bicycle. It was one of the first motorbike manufacturers, one of the first car manufacturers in 1904. They did so very, very much indeed. It really is a phenomenal amount of history. Developing the jet engine, building tank engines, building aircraft engines, building the jet engine. The Rover company did so very, very much. They almost had a jet-powered car in production in the 1960s. And then, of course, tying up with Honda in the 1980s into the 90s. That was a real kind of masterstroke of industrial creativity. Both of those companies needed help to improve and to expand their ranges and break into other markets, and by combining they made themselves much more powerful, much more creative, much more innovative. And that's something I really respected about Rover as a company. It was so engineering led. It was a real innovator of interesting, clever cars. Unfortunately, decisions that were very above the company itself at government level really several times throughout the decade. Unfortunately though, they never really recovered from the industrial relations in the 1970s, Red Robbo and his gang, and bad management in the 60s, making some pretty poor decisions, and then the government selling them out and basically handing them over to BMW. Licky Hills, that's funny. This has been a real adventure, seeing all the places that Rover existed, where they built their cars, where they created their cars, where they did so much over the years. For a Rover botherer like me, it's been a real interesting adventure, and I hope you've enjoyed joining me on it. Of course, there is so much more history to tell with the Rover company. There is so much more history to tell that a mere 20 or 30 minute video couldn't even scratch the surface of it. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this, please, as always, hit like, subscribe, share with your friends, and join me again next time. Well, we probably won't be driving something completely different. I imagine it'll be something Roverish. It generally is. But thank you for watching. Now, I'm pretty sure we drove down a lot of these roads when we were doing our 24 hours in an electric car thing back in October.